I have something very unusual on this channel. I guess it's not that unusual. Maybe I'm being a little too hard on myself, but something a little surprising. I have a story that's just straight up and down good news. A story that's going to make your day brighter. A story that's going to maybe even change your worldview. You'll realize in the same way that I did in reading this story that actual good things can happen. Good, positive things can happen in the world. Things that you can get excited about and you can just enjoy, like the beam of sunlight breaking through the overcast clouds of the dour news of various things that I talk about on this channel, or the general news that you happen to be watching anyways. No, just a good old-fashioned good news story. It involves a lot of different elements that you're probably not familiar with. The first being Jack Kinmer. You're actually probably familiar with him if you watch the other Zealandism today. If you didn't, you're obviously a fake fan. How dare you not watching the multiple uploads we have on this channel a day? If you don't watch every single one of them, I'm disowning you and I'll never talk to you again. If you ask to take a picture with me, I'll be able to smell the fact that, you've never watched every single one of these videos, and I'm breaking up with you. You can't sit with us. We wear pink on, I forgot what day they wear pink in that movie, but Fridays, Tuesdays? On Tuesdays we wear, on Fridays we wear pink. Is it? I think it's Tuesday. I think it's Tuesday. And the bad thing about that is if you correct me and say it's not Tuesday, you have to hand in your man card if you happen to be a dude, because then you've watched Mean Girls more than me. So you're cornered. But the story itself, shout out to Jack Kinmer, made the initial thread that got my attention on this. It's about Richard Kone, who is a striker from a forward from Ivory Coast, who has gone on one of the most ridiculous journeys you will ever see. And this involves something called the Homeless World Cup, which I kind of knew existed, but I always thought it was more of like a charity thing than an actual tournament that could produce a serious professional footballer. This is Richard Kone, by the way, and this is the beginning of his story as told by Jack Kinmer, who deserves your follow on Twitter for what he was able to do in terms of presenting this information in a positive way. But growing up in the Ivory Coast, Richard was forced to live on the streets after being kicked out of his home. I found after further investigation, that Richard Kone was allegedly, according to an interview he gave to the Homeless World Cup in 2019, kicked out of his home because he said he was gay. He has since reconnected with his mother, and they've kind of smoothed things over, he said in another interview. But he did say that he was gay and that that's why his family had kicked him out. So that's just a whole other layer to this story of madness. But Jack quotes him as saying, "It is terribly difficult being homeless in my country. When you try and ask for a little bit of help, they ignore you." So we're talking about somebody that growing up was kicked out of his house in the Ivory Coast, a country where even if you are living in a house, right, with your family, it is going to be a tougher place to grow up in than, we're not talking about a full-blown first world country here, if you're not familiar with the ongoings in the Ivory Coast, right? And now you're talking about being homeless in a country that is decidedly not a first world country at the moment. And that is unimaginably difficult. Like if you just rattle your head for a second, it is impossible for somebody that grew up in the warm embrace of American suburbanism, or, probably the vast majority of you guys, wherever you happen to grow up, it is impossible for us to imagine the depths of human depravity that you reach being homeless in, Ivory Coast, in a West African country that has struggles to be able to provide things like plumbing and electricity to good portions of its population, even when they are in homes in the first place. And this is a human experience that fortunately a lot of us are not going to be privy to. This guy was subjected to, and it sounds like, at least according to his telling of the story, he was subjected to just because of, because the way he is, right? And so this is just a brutal spot for my boy Richard Kone to be in, right? Absolutely nasty spot. And at this point, he's not like playing football anywhere. He's just trying to survive. And he didn't get a chance to finish school, as Jack points out here. But he was, at the age of 17, he was given an opportunity. So we're not talking about 13, 14. We're talking about 17 years old when an opportunity first comes to Richard Kone. A friend of Richard's introduces him to the president of an organization called Don't Forget Them, which uses sports to help people in extremely difficult situations. According to other articles I've read to kind of color in what Jack's talking about here, this is basically a street football organization that organizes football leagues that you kind of don't have to pay for, right? That you can just play in. And so Richard Kone shows up and starts to play, starts to train every day, right? As somebody that is homeless in playing football. And the idea is that if he trains and plays every day, that he has the chance to be selected for the Homeless World Cup, which is being held in Cardiff, in Wales. Now, this is somebody that's, Kone is somebody that's never left Ivory Coast, let alone been on an airplane. But he obviously, if you can tell where this story is going, he does very well in the don't forget them kind of street football league. And he gets selected to the Homeless World Cup team and goes to Cardiff, hops on a plane, and he does well. He actually does well at the Homeless World Cup. In fact, he does so well that he ends up signing with a club that was called Lopes Tavares. It switched its name to Athletic Newham. But they're in the 9th tier of England. So this was in Cardiff. And he basically comes over for the Homeless World Cup and then just, does so well at the Homeless World Cup in terms of his performance, he's able to sign a contract and stay in England to play in the 9th tier. Now, his status in the UK, he was applying for permanent residency at the time and all of this stuff. His status in the UK was not such that he was able to sign an actual professional contract. But if it was, he might have been signed even earlier. Because in his 5 years playing for Athletic Newham in just the doldrums, the low down level of England, the 9th tier and then the 8th tier, he scores an absolute fuck ton of goals, right? I'm not overusing that phrase, okay? 14 goals and 20 appearances for a guy that, mind you, literally just moved from Ivory Coast to England as part of him coming to play at the Homeless World Cup. Somebody that grew up homeless in the Ivory Coast and had just been playing street football, lacing them up in the 9th division of England and scoring 14 goals. Then they get up to the Essex Senior League and he scores 31 goals in 36 matches in the 2021-2022 season. That is psychotic. That's insane. That's a really, really high level of production. He scored so many goals. He scored 28 goals in 32 matches in the next season, right? Like this is crazy production. And what they're saying, not just Jack, but also the other articles I could find on this talking about how he probably would have been signed by a club in a higher division sooner if his work permit situation was like fully fleshed out. But once it was fully fleshed out and he was kind of fully legally allowed to stay in England and like everything was established, he made a pretty massive move. He signs with Wycombe Wanderers in January of 2024. This is like an actual club. This is the same club that Adebayo Akinfenwa, the strength merchant and everybody's favorite player on EAFC or FIFA at the time, this is the club he played for. This is a football league club that Richard Kone is now playing for, that he has now all of a sudden joined. Somebody that was homeless in the Ivory Coast 6 years ago, who is now in January of 2024 signing for Wycombe Wanderers in League One. That's unbelievable. And still, obviously, a big roll of the dice taken by Wycombe Wanderers to jump him up like 6 leagues in the English tier system. But, they ended up being rewarded for it almost instantly, because days after joining, Richard scores the winner on his debut, an EFL Trophy quarterfinal clash with West Ham. Now, EFL Trophy, that's against, I believe, the West Ham youth team, right? It is not against like the West Ham U23s or something. This is the Pizza Cup, I believe. But he did become a first-team regular at the age of 21 and netted against Aston Villa in the League Cup. So in that first in his first year, not first season, but in his first year with Wycombe Wanderers, he becomes like an actual player. We're talking somebody that in 5 years went from being homeless on the streets in Ivory Coast to scoring against Aston Villa in the League Cup. Where else is there a story like that in football? If it exists, please point me in that general direction, because I want to hear about it. That's absolutely insane. And the reason I think that Jack Kenmere is tweeting about this now is on Saturday, Richard came on as a substitute and scored a perfect hat trick inside 9 minutes. He pulled a mini Lewandowski. They were losing 1-0 when he subbed in, and then he ended up scoring 3 goals. He is a very legitimate professional footballer who is showing the ability to maybe even play at a higher level than he's playing at right now with Wickham Wanderers. And who knows how long he's going to be developing? Because again, 5 years ago, this dude was just joining a street football league in the Ivory Coast, and now he's already in League One. So he probably has a lot more room to grow than most 21-year-olds out there, because he just has not been playing football for that long, but he's already this good. He's already playing at Wickham Wanderers in League One. So next time you happen across a Wickham Wanderers match, right, and you see Richard Kone, just remember how ridiculous it is that this guy happens to be here, that he's made it this far. This story kind of reminds me of a story that I told on my main YouTube channel a while ago, the guy Gift Orban, who was basically in the training to become a police officer, but then managed to find his way to Norway thanks to some sort of trial program, and in like 2 years became a player that was on the radar of some of Europe's biggest clubs because of the way he was scoring goals. There is so much untapped potential talent in Africa, right? And in these countries where the infrastructure is perhaps not there to develop all of that potential talent, that giving these guys opportunities can potentially reward clubs in truly unbelievable, spectacular ways. And things like the Homeless World Cup can actually produce legitimate professional footballers. In any tournament that you create that provides these types of guys opportunities to show how good they could be is a tournament worth creating. It's a tournament worth hosting. But seriously, does this story not make you happy? I mean, my goodness. Look at this guy go, dude. Look at this guy go. For the sake of the Disney-esque story, I hope he keeps developing. I hope he makes it to the very top. That's awesome.